So this is Heather Against the Haunts, a short story for young adult readers set in the universe of Maidens of Zombie Kingdom by Jay Wilburn. Heather was exhausted from too many days on the run and too little sleep. Her back literally to the wall, she suffered one glance upon the cliffs stretching toward the sky, too sheer to climb safely. There was room to maneuver from side to side along the steep, uneven base of the rocky faces, but nowhere really to go. It didn't help that she couldn't see what chased her every night for as long as she could remember. Her days and nights were starting to blend, and even though it was not yet full dark, the spirits that hunted her were already making noise. She could not see them, but knew they were close. There was too much darkness still in the world. Even if her order of knights had succeeded in defeating the wielders of dark magic and their army of hungry ghouls, there was plenty of dark magic left in the land and all manner of monstrous things to bring her and her friends to a painful end. Heather held her sword at the ready in shaky hands, even though she had no idea how to stab something that had no body. Her head ached, her muscles tightened and twitched from overuse, and her vision tried its best to blur from too little sleep and the tears of weary sorrow. Still, she was able to spy the first clue of the hunting things coming toward her. In the last slanting light of day, it was in the tall grass. In the last slanting side of day, It was in the tall grass. Whatever spirits they were, whether on purpose or not, the grass laid down in their path in two lines as if by unseen feet or wagon wheels. Those depressions in the grasses left dark stripes that slowly rose as new lines were pressed in front of those. It wasn't exactly like some invisible being taking steps, but she tracked the progress of multiple things, drawing toward where she made her stand. "What are you?" she called. "I demand that you show yourselves instead of hiding like cowards." Heather wasn't sure that antagonizing them was the right move, but if she could coax them into becoming solid, or at the very least something she could see, that would be of some advantage. She would grow to regret this very soon. The light seemed to fall out of the world all at once. The oranges and pinks of the sunset became purples and deep blues unto black. The first stars had not yet shown themselves, at least not on this part of the world. But the shadows owned the land between every tree and rock, stretching back into the veiled distance. It was such an abrupt extinguishing of the sun that she thought maybe she had lost time. It would not be the first time since these spirits had marked her as their prey. That's when the first of the stalking things revealed itself in a form that did not belong to it. The solid's manifestation was still a bit transparent, but the surrounding darkness defined it well as the figure gave off a sickly light of its own. It wasn't bright except in contrast to the surrounding gloom. All right. And it still left many of the details blurry. It was the sort of light that felt poisonous if you were exposed to it for too long. What bothered her most, what undid her, as the spirits probably hoped, was that she recognized the figure. Her mother had died horribly in the first days of the invasion, and the ghouls a very long time ago. Heather feared she might have forgotten her mother's face, but this evil spirit taking on her image and reaching out her arms to Heather showed her that she had not forgotten at all. Her father formed in the grasses behind the false image of her mother. They both reached for her. Her brother, a former squire of the kingdom, a boy who would have never imagined that his sister would... Her brother, a former squire of the kingdom, a boy who would have never imagined that his sister would become a knight instead of him. He glared at her from his ghostly form. His colorless eyes were full of danger and threat. All right. Alongside them, stretching out in both directions in the growing mob, were other deceased family, friends she had lost in the wars, fellow knights who had sacrificed themselves in battle for the preservation of the kingdom of Valahark. They now lined the base of the cliff, all reaching for her, all inviting her. I'm going to put a comma there. All inviting her to join them in their sickly light of the spirit world. If she would not join, a few of them looked sinister enough to drag her out of the world of the living. Heather sheathed her sword but did not move toward them. She did not accept their invitation. As she tried to make her way around, the spirits in their stolen forms moved sideways to keep her from coming down the slope. The act of trying to flank around them while staying out of their dishonest reach drove her slowly up the incline toward the cliff walls instead of away. All right. From over a top edge, she saw a ruined castle. This might have been from the time of the ghouls. The kingdom was full of old ruins from the distant past, too. This looked like one of those. If she searched, she might have found a way up. She might be able to climb inside the abandoned place. It felt like a trap, too, though. With all these spirits after her, the castle felt like it was reaching out invisible arms to invite her into its dark trouble. There was no salvation. Hold on. There was no salvation in that dead place. All right. Like that. The spirits began whispering to her. Their voices came harsh and strained, as if from vocal cords of something, from the vocal cords of something trapped and drying out in a grave. They could not imitate the voices of those she had loved, so they invited her to join them in crackling tones full of threat. "Leave me alone," she cried, as the ground grew steeper and more treacherous under her. Let's say ahead of her, she spotted below gravestones from ancient burials. Who would bury bodies on the side of a mountain like this? The stones were coated in mosses and lichens. All right, let me put a question mark back here. Who would bury bodies on the side of a mountain like this? The stones were coated in mosses and lichens. She couldn't see well enough to tell for sure, but she guessed the writing, the words etched into the stones and worn down to illegible. What was the cost of walking through graves tonight? Would that give power to the spirits, or would that give power to the spirits, or would they be forbidden from crossing? It seemed too big a risk to test. All right. They kept pace with her and even drew closer. You are not real. You cannot hurt. Be gone. I banish you back to the world of the dead and demons. Heather had no magic about her, although she had seen plenty used by people on the side of light and darkness. The spirits did not leave. They did not vanish or even flinch at her challenge. They just kept offering their arms, and their dry, dead voices hailed and offered her their help in tones that made her skin crawl. She drew her sword again, stopping short of the old cemetery. You'll not have me. I will not surrender to you. They reached forward, and she swung. Her blade sliced through their forms. The spirits came apart and then reformed a few feet away, a few more paces away. They gave up the familiar forms of her family and friends. Alright, they reached forward and she swung. Her blade sliced through their forms. The spirits came apart and then reformed a few paces away. I'm using the word form too many. They gave up the familiar images of her family and friends. Their visages were those of monstrous things ready to consume her soul. She continued to strike and stab, but the spirits always manifested again, worse than they had appeared before. All right. The spirits parted. The spirits parted, and another figure hidden in a mix of light and nighttime shadows emerged. Heather froze in place, seeing Princess Darn again. Unlike the others in this group of imitating haunts, as far as she knew, Darn was still alive. Anything was possible, though, among the living and the dead. Heather, the image of Darn, spoke her name clearer than the other spirits around her. I will not accept false things as true, Heather said in a weak voice, lacking much of her usual conviction. The point of her sword dipped all the way to the stony ground. And she was forced to lean on it like a cane instead of a knight's weapon. Darn smiled, and it looked all the world like her. The creator of Heather's, I need to put another letter there, Heather's Order of Knights. You never should. Darn lifted her arms at her sides, and the other spirits recoiled around her. She extended her hands and her fingers. A swirl of white and purple light bled out from the tips and started to snake around the bodies of the other dissolving forms. There was a hint of strained cries, but then the spirits disappeared from sight, and the night didn't seem quite as dark as it had before. Heather looked up to see the stars, the stars were there after all in their usual places. The walls of the ancient castle above them shined on its smooth surfaces. The walls of the ancient castle above them shined on its smooth surfaces from the miraculous starlight. When she looked down the slope, Darn was still there in her armor, waiting. I don't know what's real anymore. We thought we had lost you, Darn said. We've been searching and trying to follow your trail. We didn't know what had set upon you, but we could tell it was not natural. Do you know what those creatures were? Heather shook her head. I'm not even sure you were real. Darn laughed a little, but then stopped when she realized Heather had not joined her. Darn reached out, but Heather backed up the slope a little. Her fine sword plowed the shallow dirt a little and then scraped rock. Okay, like that. The princess lowered her arms and said, How might I prove myself? I don't know. This puts us in quite a position if I am who I say I am and came to save you. Morning, Heather said. What's that mean? If you are still here when morning dawns, I'll know you are real. Darn looked about and sat down on a rock. What are you doing? Heather asked. I'm your friend. I'm here to help, and I will wait all the hours until morning if that's what it takes. Heather almost ran to her friend right then and there. That was the sort of person she knew Darn to be, but she had to be sure, so Heather sat down as well, with the distance between them on the slope. It was more of a controlled collapse than truly sitting down. Her sword dropped from her grasp, but still lay within reach should she find the need or the strength to lift it again. Alright. Alright. Going to sleep was quite tempting. It would be a deep sleep too, but she had to be sure. Deep sleep 2, let's say, comma, probably dreamless. But she had to be sure. After surviving this long, she couldn't give up now. Is there anything I can give you? Darn asked. Heather shook her head and made her skull ache in the process. Just be here once morning dawns. Please still be here. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I will be. I will. Heather nearly dozed twice, and the new day was still much farther away than the one that had just passed. It reminded her of terrible battles they had fought together through the entire night. Heather took a deep breath and said, "How did you use magic? I have never seen that from you before." Darn sighed. "I come by it naturally, as you may know. I've been trying to avoid it. It's a very long story." "We have until morning." "That's true, but it is a story I'd rather tell in the light. Maybe we can discuss more pleasant things now." "I have not had many pleasant things happen lately." Darn nodded and looked away. "Me either." So they sat there in silence, waiting for the morning light to prove their friendship.